So, what is human computer interaction or user experience or whatever other term you might have heard thrown around? Let's explore that. So, this class is called HCI for Human Computer Interaction. At its core, HCI is the study of how people design, implement, and use interactive computer systems and how computers affect individuals, organizations, and society. HCI tends to focus, it's a focus on pure research. It's an academic discipline. It involves a lot of different disciplines. Engineering, computer science, and some technical disciplines, hence the reason this class is actually taught in the CS department. I actually got my start, as I mentioned, in the computer science department. I started out, funny story, before, when I was still in high school and I was trying to decide, okay, what do I want to major in? I was really interested in people, but I was also really interested in technology. I was one of those kids that I didn't have any brothers, and so I was the one that hung out with my dad when he was actually the librarian for the local Commodore users group when I was growing up, and I would sit there and watch him make discs of programs for the members every week, and I spent time as a kid programming my Commodore 64 and my Commodore 128, and yeah, those are machines that don't exist anymore, except in, well, I used to have my old Commodore 64. I think we finally got rid of it. But in any case, I really found technology fascinating, but I also really liked people. But then I sat down and I thought about it when I went to college, and I said, okay, which one of these majors is actually going to get me a job after graduation? And that's why I went into computers. However, about halfway through college, I discovered that there was this field of HCI that would actually combine computer science and psychology, sociology, ethnography, and those other people things that I enjoyed. And I actually switched my minor from, I don't even remember what my minor was prior. I hadn't really started taking my minor classes. I'd taken a psychology class as a humanities requirement, and then realized, oh, there's this whole field of HCI that actually combines the two things I'm really interested in. And so the psychology class I had taken now became part of my minor, and I took something else for my humanities requirement. And so there's this whole field opened up. So HCI is looking at the technology aspect. It also brings to bear the human animal you'll keep hearing me talk about, and how that works. And really, I probably should add psychology, sociology, ethnography. There's actually physiology as well, because especially when you get into human factors, hardcore human factors and usability, we even talk about, and we'll talk about this in the lessons about physical capabilities. We talk about things like the structure of the eye, and we go back and we say, how much data is the human physically capable of taking in, not just mentally capable of taking in, but physically capable of taking in. And, when we look at things like color blindness is a physical trait. And so when we're looking at things like font sizes and how font sizes affect design, sure, font sizes are somewhat of a visual when we look at font sizes from a design perspective, there's certainly some design aspects of, do they look pleasing to the eye? But there's also font sizes from the aspect of things like visual angle, and are they readable, and line length, and there's a lot of, can the human eye take those things in appropriately? And like I said, we'll talk about all of those when we get to the segment on human physiology. So we've got HCI's computer science. What do they see? Can I attain the quantitative data on how people use the program? What does the typical user go about using the interface. HCI is psychology. How do the users perceive the system? Can the design communicate its actual use? How does my interface communicate what the program accomplishes, and why do users make the choices that they make? And then HCI is neuroscience. When somebody looks at the program, how do they physically perceive it? And how can I make this someone more productive? Then you've also got, of course, design. Design, as I've said in the section on why do HCI, design is becoming more and more of a factor. A lot of people don't realize that satisfaction has always been part of usability, but it's really becoming prevalent in user experience. It's becoming huge. Design as, the emotional affect, the emotional visceral reaction that people have to a product is becoming so much more important, and people are paying so much more attention to it. And so the graphic design and the interaction design aspects are becoming something that people are paying more attention to, and it's becoming its own recognized skill set. It's always been a skill set that we within the field have recognized, but people outside this field are starting to recognize that design is a separate skill set from research, which is a separate skill set from programming. And there's beginning to be some differentiation outside of our little world. People are beginning to recognize that there is more than just the user experience unicorn. And we'll talk about that in just a little bit. So let's talk about all of those terms. And I will admit, you'll hear me talk about some of these somewhat interchangeably. I will try not to be too interchangeable with them when I don't intend to be. But to be perfectly honest, so I've been in the field, when you count college, 20-something years. And I've been out in the field 20 years, and then when you count college, a little bit more. So this field has somewhat suffered from an identity problem, in that it's taken on a little bit of the identity of what the outsiders have said. We know what our identity has been to a certain extent, although it also suffers from an internal identity problem, in that because we come from so many different fields, as you saw in that last diagram, that everybody comes with a little bit different perspective. And as long as you keep an open mind about that, it's great, because you learn a lot from different people. Unfortunately, as in any field, you occasionally run into those people who think that they're right. So just stay away from those people and it will be fine. But to the outside world, for instance, the outside world, they're going to call you whatever they think, whatever term is lodged in their head. So for instance, my very first job when I moved back to Texas after my graduate degree, I was called an HCI engineer. I did user experience work, but the job title they had decided was HCI engineer. Fine, whatever. The next job title I believe I had was a usability consultant. I did the exact same work. I was doing interaction design, I was doing user experience research, I was doing usability testing. Next job, when I was a usability consultant, I was doing user research, I was doing interaction design, I was doing usability testing. Later on, I became a user-centered design engineer. Guess what I did? User research, interaction design, usability testing. Oh, and I did some prototyping in there as well, because like I said, I have a computer science background, so I tend to make a lot of my own prototypes. I do some Photoshop work. I'm not a visual designer. Don't ask me to do visual design. I can critique it. I can teach it to a certain extent. I can teach you the basics, but I am not a visual designer, which goes to a separate part of the lecture. But I've been called a lot of different things depending on what the latest buzzword is, but my job has been largely the same. And so that's just to tell you that on one hand, don't get hung up with the labels. On the other hand, you want to use the right terms when you can. And like I said, I'll try to when I can. You want to try to use the correct terms, but at the same time, don't get so hung up on the labels that you get into arguments with folks. So I'm going to give you some of the right labels here so you know what they are. as you're having conversations with folks. And so you can kind of understand how these all fit together. And then, so you can carry it forward. But at the same time, I don't want you to be alarmed or confused when you hear people use the wrong labels in wrong places. And like I said, it just comes from as as things have moved along in the industry, we've kind of, labels have evolved, labels have been misapplied, and so on. So, in the science realm, like we said, human-computer interaction is what we just described, the study, planning, design, and uses of the interfaces. It's kind of the intersection of computer science, behavioral sciences, design, media studies, and several other fields. It tends to be looked at as more academic, and you don't really see HCI used in industry so much anymore. So usability engineering is the field that is concerned generally with human-computer interaction and specifically with devising HCI interfaces that have high usability and otherwise known as user friendliness. Now, usability engineering, usability is one of the catch-all terms you'll hear a lot. It stems from the old thinking where people think, oh, usability, and apply it to the whole thing, being usability is the start to finish process, which in a way, usability is what we are trying to achieve, and that's fine. For folks that are more in the know, so to speak, usability speaks to kind of that last part of the process where we're doing the usability testing. The other perspective on usability is that it is the part of the triangle that is, we talk about useful, usable, and satisfying. Usable is, can somebody physically interact with the product in a way that allows them to accomplish the task? And I'll talk a little bit more about usable from that perspective in just a little bit. So usability engineering is really looking about, can it be used? Can somebody, given any particular task that the software or the application or the device is supposed to accomplish, can the user do it? Next, you've got, continue on with that official definition of usability. We've got the efficiency, effectiveness, and satisfaction with which users achieve their goals. So, for example, that effectiveness is a key part of usability, because we also talk about useful, usable, and so efficiency is how quickly can you get through it. Effectiveness is, can you complete the task correctly? And then satisfying is, is it a pleasant experience, or does the user want to throw the computer through a window? So a great example I like to use is tax software, but I'm assuming that at least part of my audience here is not necessarily at the point where you have to file taxes. So let's talk about e-learning software, because, well, let's face it, I'm going to rip on Blackboard most of the semester because I hate it, especially now that my kids' schools use Canvas as their LMS, and it's much more pleasant to use. Anyway, so for instance, if you as a student come to the learning management system and you are able to find your grades, find your teacher feedback, look at your classes, all of those things, and you are able to do it, it is effective. If it takes you twice as long as it should, it is not efficient, but it is still effective if you are able to successfully complete the task. Now, if it makes you want to throw the computer through the window when you're finished, it's not pleasant. So I would rate Blackboard actually as failing across the board because, for instance, last year when we ran into some issues because students were not able to find the feedback, I would put feedback into when I grade tests, I would put feedback into the system so that users would be able to find it. So students, in this case, would be the users, would be able to find the feedback that I was providing on their answers. And I have several students come to me and say, hey, I'd like feedback on my tests. Where what did I get wrong? And I said, oh, I provided that feedback on your test. And they would say, no, you didn't. And it turns out they were not able to find where on Blackboard the feedback was provided. And so that's an example of a place where the effectiveness of Blackboard had fallen down. And if you can't be effective, you certainly can't be efficient. Now, if Blackboard was pretty and easy to log into and all that kind of stuff, it could still be pleasant, even though it was falling down on the efficiency and the effectiveness. But so it is there. When you're looking at the usability, there's actually a lot of factors here, because in fact, being pleasant to use can actually cover up a lot of sins. There's some research that shows some weird inverse, not inverse relationships between pleasantness and efficiency, but the higher something is on the pleasant to use scale, the more forgiving people are about the efficiency and stuff like that. I'll see if I can find that research article and potentially put it in to the readings this semester. So moving on back to our definitions. So user-centered design. So user-centered design was the buzzword for a long, long time. Once we got out of the researchy human-computer interaction and we got into, okay, human-computer interaction is really interesting, so how do we apply this to real products and stuff like that? And so things became user-centered design. And it's a process. User-centered design is a process, and it's not restricted to interface or technology or anything like that, in which the needs, the wants, and the limitations of end users are given extensive attention at each stage of the design process. And there's actually nothing wrong with that. I mean, that's great. And you'll actually hear plenty of people still talk about UCD. And really, if you look at it, UCD and user experience, they're a lot alike. And in fact, the process that we go through to get to user experience, a lot of the user-centered design, a lot of the process that we're doing in user experience, it really is a user-centered design process, and the outcome is user experience. The thing that you have to be careful of, and where a lot of people kind of got away from user-centered design, is kind of the same pitfall with Agile, is that when you focus so much on the users, you have to be careful. The users think they know what they want, but users are not designers. Users are not psychologists. Users are not technologists. Users think they want something that flashes red and green, but that's not actually the best design. And so while being conscious of the users is good, having the users tell you how to design something is not. And so you have to be really careful. And so being conscious of the user-centered design process by itself is not bad. And it's just, there's a pitfall there you have to avoid. Now, of course, user experience takes that process and builds on it and pays attention to a lot more than just, let's pay attention to users to build an end product. And you'll see that over the coming semester, actually. So, but once again, UCD is still a process that we're looking at the needs, wants, and limitations at each stage of the design process. Now, let's see how usability and user-centered design is moving towards user experience. It's basically, all of this is a progression of a maturing discipline. Like I said, I look back over the last 20 years, I had to go to grad school, and to get even think about getting a job in this field, it was a very specialized degree. I went to Ohio to get it. It was a very narrow focus, like I said, on task performance. And now we're looking at the entire system. I mean, when Apple redesigned the experience of taking the phone out of the box, it was a watershed moment in design, because before, I don't want to say nobody gave any thought to packaging, because that's actually not true. I actually did a project with a printer manufacturer that will remain nameless, where we were paying attention to the placemat, which is back when everything wasn't, pull something out of the box, plug it in, and then go online to find all the information you need. It was the big sheet of paper you used to get. You'd take a printer out of a box, you'd get a big sheet of paper that showed you how to plug everything in and turn the CD on and all of that. But we actually were helping them redesign that whole experience of taking something out of the box. And how do you take a printer out of the box and plug it into your computer and load the drivers and all of that. So it wasn't that Apple was the first first group to think of that part of the process that wasn't the direct interface, but they were the ones that did it right. And they were the ones that just made it as big a deal as they did. And so that was kind of like a watershed moment in the industry of, you know what, it's not just about what's on the screen. And so we've really kind of reached that point where now we're looking at the whole system. We're looking at not just the person's interaction with the device, the computer, the system, but we're looking at the whole system. And so that brings in the emotional implications, like I see on the screen, the social. We're looking at style, art, branding, reputation, political, social, personal connections. We're looking at everything. So you get the full user and system and social experience, especially in our increasingly connected society. So just to kind of show you, one progression through all of that. So this is, back in the old, actually it's not too old because it's Microsoft and not, we're not going all the way back to Unix, but you can see from the copyright date, God, I hope it doesn't predate too many of you. Anyway, no, it shouldn't. 2001. Okay, so you can see, like, if we were going to zoom in a map, zoom in 25% on the map, we're having to do it through the command line. The next step, we could zoom in using menu-driven tools, or you could use the keyboard shortcuts if you knew them. Next, and this is actually probably new enough that some of you are familiar with it, you can zoom in using, using these and the slider. Okay, this is where I grew up, right here. And then, moving on from there, we've got actual direct manipulation where, you've got the finger, you can do multi-touch, you can touch exactly where you want. And then we go from there to, but this, you're still interacting with the map by yourself. This is a very modern interface, but you're still you're still interacting by yourself. And then let's take that direct manipulation and we'll add the social aspect to it. And not only does Waze add the social aspect of you're connecting with all these drivers, but they've also added gamification, because you can, you're collecting points, you can eat candy, you can try to level up within your avatar. You can choose an avatar if you want. You're helping your community because you can report accidents and say, hey, there's a car crash up here, and that sort of thing to help Waze redirect others. And then you can also get involved because you can become a community, you can become a map editor if you want. I'm a volunteer map editor for Waze. I spent, like, back when Hurricane Harvey hit last year, I spent probably 18 hours a day during that time sitting in my recliner, because we only got minimal flooding. Actually, I say minimal flooding. We only got 2 feet of flooding up here in Conroe, as opposed to the 50 inches they got down in downtown Houston. But I sat here in a recliner watching the news, trying to keep up with the road closures so that we could help direct people around all the water closures in Waze in Houston. And so you get a sense of community in multiple ways in Waze. And so that kind of shows you the progression of just within one type of UI, from the progression from just, those first few looking at the they were looking at how do I change the usability of the single user. And then we've moved from, from the Google map I just showed you to here. This is just, this is essentially, it's the same interface. It's a direct manipulation interface of the map, but we've added that social aspect to it to kind of expand the user interface, the user experience of the map. And actually, in all fairness, Google is doing a similar Google local guides, but they just don't have the same cachet and the same. I'm actually an editor with Waze, and I am a local guide with Google, and I can tell you the two programs are night and day different. So continuing on, I mean, you can extrapolate from those two. You can extrapolate to, you look at things like on Bones and CSI, or movies like Minority Report. You see them waving their arms and hands around and sweeping movements to move data and images around to apply various kinds of analyses. We're gonna get there. I mean, we're already starting to get there with some of these large, like the new Microsoft Surface with a really large screen and those sorts of things. You've got the big electronic whiteboards these days that you're starting to see, actually not starting to see, that you're seeing in several places now. I mean, we're rapidly getting to those kind of places. The large whiteboards that can be used to do collaboration conferencing and that sort of thing. So we're definitely getting to a more connected society, and a more our interaction mechanisms are definitely changing. Usability is still very important, though, because usability is you're helping novices perform like experts and helping experts achieve their potential. And that's something that a lot of people forget, is that yes, it's really important to help new folks jump in very quickly, but it's actually in most cases, or in a lot of cases, it's helping experts achieve their potential, helping experts achieve things very quickly. A lot of people, especially new folks, get hung up on the fact that we've got to make this thing as easy as possible. We got to make something really intuitive. But if you think about it, and that's absolutely true for like a kiosk or something like that people aren't going to use very often, tax software, something like that. But if you think about it, a lot of software, Microsoft Word is a great example. Excel, billing software, electronic health records, like I work on a lot. Those are things that most of the users are expert users, and they use it day in and day out. They use it all the time. And those are the things, like electronic health records is a great example. Those are pieces of software that efficiency is a lot more important than, I don't want to say ease of use. I want to say, so efficiency is the most important thing, because doctors want to spend as much time with their patients and as little time on their computer. Now, if you make something really intuitive and really easy to like walk up and use without problems, a lot of times that involves a lot of extra clicks. And so there's a trade-off here of it's okay to require a little bit of training to get to that most efficient state, because if you have something that somebody uses all the time, it's okay to require a little bit of training to get to that most efficient state. You still want to make it as easy to use as possible. You want to make it, don't require a lot of extra clicks. Don't hide things. But what you don't want is, you don't need a wizard interface it all the time. But you look at experts and you look at requiring, you look at making shortcuts available. You look at making certain things able to, making it possible to hide certain things. And so I don't want to belabor this point now, because we'll talk about it more when we get to things like design and stuff like that. But the point I want to make is usability. Yes, you're looking at novices, but you also want to look at experts. And the way you help experts achieve their potential is different than how you help novices perform like expert, or how you design software that's only used every once in a while. So just keep that in mind. So moving on to the hierarchy of UX needs. I hinted this a little bit. So utility, it must be useful. It must meet my needs. If it's, if you're building tax software and I don't need to file my taxes, I'm not going to use it. If you're building, for instance, e-learning, if I can't submit my file on e-learning, I'm not going to submit it. I'm going to find another way to do it. I'm going to email it to the professor. Lots of people do that. I really, really dislike it, but I understand that occasionally it happens. If it's not useful, I'm not going to use it. It doesn't matter if it's usable. It doesn't matter if it's desirable. It doesn't matter if the brand experience is great. If it's not useful, I'm not going to use it. There's no point in me doing something that there's no reason. After you look at the utility, then it goes to usable. Now, this is where we get to some interesting. Theoretically, usable is next. Like, okay, the product does what I need. Great. The product is usable. This is where desirable and usable kind of, the edges between those two are not quite as sharp as this diagram shows. Yes, if the product, once utility is met, a product that is completely unusable but is really pretty is going to lose to a product that is really usable and really ugly. Well, for the most part. But if a product is really pretty and mostly usable, is going to win out over a product that is really usable and really ugly. So there's and this is something that's been borne out, there's a tipping point there where a product is usable enough that its desirability is going to win out. So, like I said, there's that line between usability and desirability is not as solid as this diagram would have you believe. If your product is not usable at all, it doesn't matter how pleasant it is to use. It does not matter what the brand experience it is. If there's no usability there, you're sunk. Somebody may buy it, but they're not going to end up using it. They're going to end up going and finding something else to use. But at a certain point, you've got to do a certain amount of usability before you even start to think about the way it looks and feels. Because really, the usability and the look and feel should work in concert. Your design should not be done, your design as in your visual design should not be done in a vacuum. Your graphic design should not be done in a vacuum. It should work well with your interaction design, which your interaction design is where your usability plays. But your graphic design should play well with it so that your colors and your fonts and stuff like that are a natural fit. But like I said, now I don't want to say that I don't want you to go away and say, oh, well, Professor Orrick said that we don't need to worry about it being usable. That's absolutely not true. You've got to get most of that usability in there before you start worrying about the way it looks and feels. But I don't want to lie to you and say, oh yeah, something that's 100%, that's something that's 100% usable but really ugly is going to win out over something that's really, really pretty and not usable. Yeah. In the real world, like I said, what often happens is something that's really pretty will get bought first, and then somebody will try to make it work, and then they'll toss it out and go find the second place thing that's not quite as pretty, but they find out it's more usable. And like I said, where that threshold is as to how poor the usability has to be before they give up on it, it varies per product. It varies and really where it comes down to is if I don't have to use this product very often, I'm much more willing to put up with poor usability. If it's something I have to use every single day, that usability better be spot on or I'm not going to use it. And I'll talk more about this as well when we get farther into the semester. But in any case, the brand experience, it circles all of that. But once again, all that is, once again, that brand experience is it's one of those things that, people are going to use that as a trust item. So you want the other things to be strong to help enforce that brand experience. It's a two-way street. I may buy an Apple thing by default because I trust Apple, but if I buy several Apple things in a row that the desirability and the usability are poor, that may start to erode my brand, that's going to erode the brand trust that my users have. So you want to ensure that those needs inside this brand experience are met so that you don't erode the overall brand experience. So food for thought. All right. So how's user experience more than usability? I think we've covered this. It's really the totality of effects, looking across the entire ecosystem. So here's the official definition from that same ISO document. Perceptions and responses from use or anticipated use from product, system, or service. Anticipated use is key. We buy an Apple product with a certain perception of how it's going to work. And so this down here is key. If you want to improve the user experience, know the user, their abilities and limitations. Abilities and limitations, that is huge, and that is part of what I think is so important about this class. Inherent knowledge, situation, and expectations. That abilities and limitations is what I think separates a good practitioner of user experience from an average one. Because anybody can pick up a book and read about the process and read about the different activities and, read about the heuristics, know how to do the research, know how to do design. But if you understand why you're doing what you're doing, it makes a difference. If you understand why the design rules are what they are, if you understand how the questioning affects people, it's the 80-20 rule. It's like 80% of the time, the heuristics in the book are going to get you there. Maybe even 90%. But it's those 10 to 20% where the books fall down on you. If you can call upon the innate knowledge of, or the fundamental knowledge of, okay, well, this is how humans function. So wait a second, this will work. This should work. And yeah, you may have to tinker a little bit, but you have the knowledge that you can call upon that isn't just looking it up in a book. So, like I said, I'm very passionate about that abilities and limitations piece. That's really what separates really good user experience folks from somebody who just picked up a book and called themselves a UX person. And while I can't give you like an entire master's degree worth of user experience or abilities and limitations and all of that, I will give you at least some of that during the semester. All right, moving on. This is a key thing that a lot of people outside of the industry that we work with think. And even those of you coming into this class may have this same misconception. UX and UI are not the same thing. User experience, like we said, is looking at this whole big picture. We're looking at not only the interface with the screen, but we're looking at the interface with the system, the ecosystem, the person with everything around them, the people, the actors, the service, all of that. These are all the things user experience does. They do field research, they do interviewing. These are the activities that we as user experience professionals do in our processes in order to deliver a good user experience. So bear with me a little bit. I'm jumping away from what is the definition of UX in the world, and this is what is the definition of UX in perspective of how do we contribute to building a product. So this is how UX, these are not the exhaustive by any means, but these are the types of things that UX does and can do to contribute to an end product. Unfortunately, this is how UX is typically seen. In a software development product, we're often called upon to do the interface design and the visual design, and that's it. And unfortunately, if that's where we're called upon, folks have missed the boat, because one of the things that we tend to find over and over and over, even if we're given time to do user research when we do the interface design, we do some prototyping and we stick it in front of users to make sure it works before we code it on the interface design and say, hey, what do you think about this? what we find a lot of times is that, I shouldn't say a lot of times, what we find sometimes is that what the developers and the product managers have decided on, or the product managers have decided on with developers have started coding, is actually the wrong product. For instance, somebody's decided we're going to build a mobile application, and we're gung-ho on building a mobile application. Nobody wants a mobile application. They're not going to use a mobile application. Maybe they just wanted a website. Or maybe we're building a website. Nobody's going to use the website. So we're wasting a lot of time that if we had done this up here, right here, we wouldn't have even done any of the rest of this stuff because we would have known up front, going back to that whole UX saves money, we would have known up front that the product we're building isn't even wanted. There's no utility there. Or we would have known that we would have pivoted, not built a mobile site, we would have built a website or something like that. So, these food for thought, this is how UX wants to be seen. These are all the things UX can contribute. This is how UX is typically seen in a lot of development tools, a lot of development sites. This is kind of a funny analogy that my boss back when I was at GE found, and it's I continue to use it because it makes me laugh. So another perspective on UI versus UX. So this is UI right here. The spoon is the interface. This is the product. This is the data center, server. UX is the whole thing together. The spoon is what interacts with the product. But the spoon itself is the interface, the screen, so to speak. But the cereal all together is the user experience. All right, moving on. Let's go back to our words. We've talked about user-centered design. Let's throw the rest from out there. All of these things lead into user experience. Design thinking, graphic visual design, design research, user research, human factors. We'll talk about a lot of these as we move forward in the semester. And honestly, if you're reading the notes, you can read, I included the definitions in the notes for all of these. So just looking at the disciplines of UX, these are a couple of different diagrams that have run around about the disciplines of UX. Looking at this red circle is user experience design, and these are a couple of different diagrams. This one on the left is the original, and then the one on the right is a revamp that was done. So basically, it's like, okay, so what is user experience design? It's the coordination between a lot of different different elements. And you see how you've got interaction design, human-computer interaction, visual design, but you see here you've got architecture, you've got industrial design. There's a lot of other things that are part of here that aren't necessarily things that are computer related. I mean, industrial design and architecture, that's looking at things outside of our normal realm. I actually like this picture a little better. So you got UX and these are the big ones. Information architecture, visual design, interaction design, architecture, industrial design, human factors, and human-computer interaction. And you can kind of see where some of those places overlap. But there's also all these little other bubbles on the outside as well that play in. So, going back to some of this terminology, it's almost a ubiquitous term. It refers to most things that have to do with a high-quality user experience. It's a broad term, and you'll hear it a lot. But what about the term interaction? It's simply a mutual or reciprocal action. It involves an exchange, but it's not limited to just computers. It's seeing and touching, thinking about a system and a product. It's admiration or appreciation, and it's the entire experience. That's the important part. So, these are some of the key things to think about, though. It's the world is no longer just a desktop, and this was back in 2005, and it continues to evolve as we go. And these are just some various examples, both real and from different movies and demonstrations. And the other thing to think about, of course, is that our audience continues to expand as well. When I started with computers, I was 4 years old, but I was an outlier by a long shot. When I got to college, I was one of the few people that had a computer in my that had like extensive computer experience coming into college. And the fact that my mom wasn't, my dad was computer savvy, was pretty unique, but he did a lot of computers at work. I can remember him bringing certainly wasn't a laptop. It was a portable computer home, and it looked nothing like computers do these days. But age range continues to expand. So you have to think about, our audiences continue to expand. And there's some really fairly savvy computer users at a very old age these days. Of course, young age. I mean, my kids have been on computers, well, since, they didn't have that particular computer as a kid, but something very, very similar. And my kids are, just for reference sake, they're going to be 13 and 16 this semester. So, and they had something very similar as a kid. So they've been on computers their entire life. Just for reference, my husband and I met in operating systems class in college. So yeah, we have a bit of a tech savvy household. So in any case, I think I've probably touched on this over and over and over, but just to drive the point home again, UX, when I was starting, we'd had to cost justify usability, and I'll talk about that a little bit during the semester, how you do that. Luckily, it's not quite as big a deal as it used to be, but UX drives the industry these days in a lot of places. We have an explosion of UX case studies. There's an increasing intolerance for bad design. Like I said, in the EHR world, where doctors would complain but put up with the fact that all the EHRs are terrible, these days everybody's like, oh, well, okay, why doesn't it look like Apple? Now, I can go into all the reasons why, and I've said before, it can't work exactly like Apple, but still, that's the question. There's an awareness and a demand for marketing, and of course, the industry adoption. Apple, Google, Microsoft, they're all, there's definitely been an uptick in the way the look and feel. Of course, you've also got branding as part of UX. Logos, icons, brands, they mean much more than just the product they represent. For example, what does Mercedes-Benz mean to you versus Toyota versus Kia? I mean, if you think about it from the perspective of luxury and status. I mean, if you saw somebody driving by with a Mercedes-Benz or a BMW versus somebody driving in a Toyota versus somebody driving by in a Kia, does that, is there an automatic assumption about what their financial status is, or where they are in the world, that sort of thing? Ladies, I don't know if any of you are in this position, but I know if you read a lot of fashion magazines, which I don't anymore, but there's always this thing about, buy one really nice purse, one branded purse, because you get treated better in the stores if you walk in with like a Coach or a Dooney and Bourke purse. And I know a lot of you guys have no idea what I'm talking about, but the point being, ignore what the branding is, what brand purse it is, but the point being, when you walk into a store and you look nice, you're wearing brand name clothes, or you're carrying a brand name purse, you get treated better. And that's the same sort of thing. There is a perception of brand. So it's not just that there is, and so branding is part of the user experience. It's like Apple, we have an automatic assumption. Samsung is starting to get there with their Galaxies and stuff like that. There's Microsoft is finally starting to shed some of the missteps that they had with Vista and some of their early stuff, and they're still, they're still kind of a joke as far as their UIs and stuff like that go. Their UIs are actually really good these days, but they've got this perception that, people hear their brand, the brand name, and people automatically assume that they're not as good as Apple on their UIs. They're actually better than Apple, by the way. They're easier to use, faster to use. Show you the information. I can show you the research, but it's that branding, and so that's why you have to protect that integrity of that brand. So branding is also part of UX, because it's all about how people perceive things, and what they perceive is sometimes more important than how they actually so, and what they perceive could actually be more important sometimes than what is actually true. Finally, user experience is mostly felt internally. So it's the totality of effects experienced by the results of the interaction. Unfortunately, user experience cannot be designed. You cannot design the user experience. You can design for a good user experience. And then you've got the presence of a product. The presence is the relationship with the users in which the product becomes personally meaningful. Usage of technology takes on presence in our life, and the technology is used to make meaning in our life. Some great examples of that is the Apple ecosystem and the Amazon Echo. These, you've the Apple ecosystem, you've got the Mac, you've got the phone, you've got the Apple Watch. All of those things, become an ecosystem. And same thing with Alexa, and the Internet of Things is becoming this presence where technology takes on meaning, and you use it to make things happen. And so this all becomes a user experience. And so vendors are being asked to make their products Internet of Things friendly and make them play well together, and that's becoming part of good usability, is making it easy to interconnect their things with Alexa and with Siri and with all the various hubs, because this presence, this concept of the Internet of Things and making having technology make our lives easy has become so important. So finally, measuring user experience, we cannot measure it, and we cannot measure its components directly. So we estimate user experience and its components by measuring indicators through various means. We can do research, we can do using interviews, we can do satisfaction measures, we can do time on tasks, we can do various different things. There's a lot of different ways to measure the indicators, but there is no way to measure user experience directly. And these are things that we will talk about when we talk about doing research. So that's kind of a quick overview of what is user experience and human-computer interaction.